You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, my name is Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 124. Now, we're recording this at the end of February 2018, starting to see a little bit more sun, a little less snow. Actually, the weather, we've had a pretty decent last few weeks here up north.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been, you just came back from Florida, so you've had a little bit better of a last
Beautiful
couple of weeks.
weather. I'm getting my vitamin D.
And that's what we're going to talk about today on today's podcast episode. We're going to talk about vitamin D, but specifically what we're going to do is talk about something that we talk a lot about off air. I don't think we've talked too much about this on podcasts. It's something that, is if you're taking vitamin D, by the end of today's episode, you're going to understand that you really should not be taking vitamin D unless you're taking magnesium with it because of the effect that magnesium has on the absorption, which we'll talk about that. Really today's episode, we want to talk about the symptoms of, of magnesium deficiency and vitamin D deficiency, and then why they really should be taken together. Now, the funny thing with magnesium deficiency, it's one of those things that, really the symptoms are so broad, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes, that, they're so overlooked because they're so generic in a lot of ways, right? Like fatigue. Well, there's a million things that can cause fatigue. And, it's not like the average person who all of a sudden starts to lose energy, they're like, oh, my magnesium's low, right? That's not how it works. Yeah. That's not the first place their brain goes to, nor their doctors, and definitely not a mainstream, never. I would ask anybody listening to this podcast the last time a mainstream medical doctor talked about their magnesium levels.
Yeah.
And it's crucial. Magnesium is one of those things that is absolutely crucial, and really, because the majority of the population is so deficient in it, and we just don't get it in our foods like we used to, or we don't consume enough magnesium-type foods, that it really should be supplemented by everybody. And we'll talk about that more. But magnesium is one of those difficult things because it's not, magnesium isn't one of those, it never really gets a lot of news. People talk about it, people talk about magnesium, but it really doesn't get a lot of press, a lot of studies. There are a lot of studies on magnesium. Once you start going down PubMed and looking, there's a lot of research on magnesium, but they don't get a lot of headlines.
No. Well, the big pharma, there's no money in it for the magnesium. There's no money in it for them, just like vitamin D. So, unless, you get off the mainstream and you get into functional medicine like we do, then, we're looking at, we look at the body holistically. We know nutritionally that in North America, the soil is very much depleted of magnesium. It happened over 100 years ago when fertilization started to take place. They put phosphorus and they put some other minerals and things like that in the fertilizer, but they left magnesium out. And so, you become if it isn't in the soil, it's not in the plants, right? So, magnesium, and it's not like if you're low in magnesium, you're going to drop dead immediately, although I guess it is possible because when you think of what magnesium does for the heart, how it works with the heart muscle and the beat of the heart, magnesium is an essential nutrient, right? When it comes to heart, not only heart, of course, but yeah, you could drop dead because of low magnesium. Well, but just generally, people are, they're in the low end of magnesium. Their body's still operating, but they're certainly not at the top of their game, without magnesium. It's essential.
Magnesium is used in, well over 300 biochemical reactions. It's a cofactor. It's necessary. Without it, those things don't happen that well. So, it is absolutely vital. And when it comes to vitamin D, it's essential to help with the absorption of vitamin D. So one of the problems that a lot of people have that are low vitamin D is they they try to bring their vitamin D levels up, but they're not getting enough magnesium, so they're not really getting from that vitamin D what they should be. Listen, a lot of people can also correct a real severe vitamin D deficiency by bringing up their magnesium quite a bit, and then obviously supplementing with vitamin D as well. But before we get into that, let's talk about some of the kind of underlying symptoms that people have when it comes to magnesium that are often overlooked and not attributed to magnesium. Because, again, for example, one of the things that magnesium plays a massive role in is blood pressure regulation, right? However, if you could be severely deficient in magnesium, you can have high blood pressure, have all these issues with your blood pressure, go to your doctor, they're not looking at magnesium. It's not going to happen. They'll get you on every medication first.
And guess what that depletes?
It makes it worse. That's what you take a drug that will deplete that, messes up your B12. It does a whole bunch of stuff. Yes, absolutely. But the point is that, again, blood pressure, that's a big one, right? Magnesium helps a lot of people with blood pressure.
Well, because, I've always used the word with magnesium, the word relax, right? You might remember that as a child, like, if you were being bad. Not that you ever were, but if you were, right?
Hypothetically speaking.
I would say, hey, relax, right? I would use this big, deep voice with great intimidation, right? And I tell the kids, you guys, relax, right? But when you think of magnesium, think of relax. So it relaxes the blood vessels.
Yeah.
Right?
And what's interesting is that there's a couple of interesting studies that have been done over the years on magnesium and blood pressure. And here's a couple that I found interesting. There was a large study that was done showing that even the risk for high blood pressure, hypertension, was 70% lower in women who had adequate magnesium levels. So just by having normal or adequate magnesium levels, you're at 70% less likely to develop blood pressure, high blood pressure, hypertension. So, I mean, that's a big thing.
And think how important that is, right? I mean, there's one thing, we'll often scoff at cholesterol. All you have to do is go back to our podcast, and, every second or third one, we're talking about cholesterol because we just don't like the science behind it and the emphasis that modern medicine has put on statin drugs and that. But one thing we always agree with, you do not want to have elevated blood pressure.
No, because that's, again...
It's a very dangerous thing.
Sure, because if you think about it, if it's a closed system and you have higher pressure in that system, if you have any weakening anywhere, I mean, it's just going to cause a rip, a tear, a stroke, an aneurysm. Yeah. So, you don't want...
Clot.
Yeah, you don't want high blood pressure, right? Now, we have issue with the fact that sometime last year they redefined what high blood pressure was to get more people on medication. Here's something that happens all the time. They did this with cholesterol last year as well.
Yeah.
If not enough people are taking a medication, then they just lower the numbers.
They change the numbers.
They change the numbers to make the requirements. The
bar gets changed.
Yeah, pretty soon, based on the last cholesterol numbers that came out last year, pretty much everybody over the age of 40, by definition, would need statin drugs, just by changing the definition. I mean, that's all they did. So that's what happens. Right?
And, unfortunately, again, it's not to rail against medicine, but it's just reality is that there's far too many people on blood pressure medication because they do not come without major side effects. That is a medication that creates an enormous amount of side effects, right? So
yeah, it affects their brain, it affects their muscles. I mean, again, and the funny thing is that, really over the last 25, 30, 35 years, there's been a fairly large experiment with the public. 1 in 3 adults over a certain age are on a statin drug, yet it hasn't made a dent in heart disease numbers, right? I mean, it's still one of the top killers. Heart disease kills a lot of people still. All these medications, all these people on blood pressure medications, it really hasn't made much of a dent. So, again, with blood pressure, and in fact, when it comes to magnesium, this is actually one of the more studied areas of magnesium. I mean, it's been researched a ton. There was a large study done. I think it was Harvard that actually did this study where they looked at like 70,000 people, and they found that the people with the highest magnesium intake had the healthiest blood pressure numbers. Now, listen, in fairness to the study, I mean, if somebody has high levels of magnesium intake, they're eating a lot of foods containing magnesium, and a lot of the foods containing magnesium are very good for you. So it only makes sense that if you, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that if you're eating a lot of high magnesium foods, you're keeping your insulin level lower, and insulin also plays a big role in heart disease as well, especially with blood pressure. Insulin resistance is a massive cause of high blood pressure, but so is low magnesium, right? Magnesium is an absolute issue when it comes to blood pressure. So that's one symptom that if you had blood pressure, you're not thinking magnesium.
Yeah.
You're not, it's just, that's not the first thing that pops in your head. Even if you went to a cardiac specialist, they would not be thinking magnesium, even though it's extremely well researched. So that's one aspect of magnesium that, that we talk about a lot, is that aspect. But here's another thing that you kind of mentioned: sleep, right? You've mentioned that, relax. Magnesium is awesome for sleeping. It's very good for you. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people, how many people do you see in a day that magnesium has helped improve their sleep at nighttime?
Yeah, big time, right? And we often get our patients, many of them, to split up a dose of magnesium, whereas they take magnesium during the day. But if they're having trouble sleeping, we always try and get their magnesium levels up, right? Because, taking one at night, even an Epsom salt bath, right, is magnesium salts is a very, very good way to get your magnesium into your system. But, like you say, it's such a cofactor for everything. And, what we're talking about today, and we'll get to more, is that, cofactor in vitamin D and the absorption of it. And, we know how important vitamin D is.
Last week's episode that I did by myself, by the way, which is not easy to do. So we're going to have to restrict
I feel bad for you.
We're going to have to restrict your holidays just for the sake of these podcasts. I talked about how, the gut is involved in estrogen dominance. However,
that was interesting, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that you have a segment of your gut bacteria that's...
Now, I want to say this thing right, just so I get it right. The microbiome that was involved with is estrobolome.
That's right. That's exactly what it is.
See, I had to practice that. I was listening to your podcast, by the way.
It's not easy to say.
I went out for a walk. I was listening to your podcast, and honest to God, I have never heard that word estrobolome before. You mentioned it last week.
Yeah, it's interesting because it has, been popping up in research, how the gut bacteria...
Unreal.
Yeah, which goes to show you that your gut bacteria, which is why, the microbiome is really another organ, right? We talk about it as an organ. It's an organ, and that organ does play a role in estrogen metabolism, which is why if you have estrogen dominance, you have leaky gut. There's no way around it. Mm-hmm. That's one of the effects. It's like the chicken and the egg. Does leaky gut eventually lead to hormonal estrogen dominance, or does, estrogen dominance through a different direction eventually lead to leaky gut? Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you have that issue. But what's interesting as well is that not only is estrogen dominance implicated with leaky gut, if you are estrogen dominant, it is a 100% guarantee, take it to the bank, that you are magnesium deficiency, because the way it works, the inverse relationship between the higher the estrogen levels, the more likely your magnesium levels are affected because of it. So, if you're estrogen dominant, which we talk a ton about because that's a major problem.
It is a major issue today in society, big time.
And I
Men and women.
Well, I referenced that study with the BPA last week a little bit, and I wrote about it in a newsletter as well. It's amazing. And what was shocking about that study was 86% of the teens they tested had BPA in their, in their system. And BPA has a really quick time, and it's in and out of your system like 6 to 8 hours, I think. It's pretty quick. It goes to show you how often we're actually exposed to it, that when they test people, 86% of the people had BPA in their urine. But what's even more interesting is that what made the study kind of unique is they actually then took those teens and for 7 days had them avoid all processed plastic stuff, and they still were exposed to it. Yeah. And it makes sense because we're breathing it in now, right? I mean, there were studies showing that the air particles and the dust particles are actually, there's so much plastic everywhere, we're actually breathing it in. So even to deliberately try to avoid it, still...
You couldn't do it.
It's impossible. So Now, of course, BPA, one of the big problems of BPA is it is a xenoestrogen. It mimics estrogen, so it creates this estrogen dominance. So because so many people have these plastics in their system, and if you're listening to this, you have them in your system, that is making it more likely that you are magnesium deficient. If you have estrogen dominant symptoms, you absolutely have a magnesium deficiency. You should be taking magnesium every day. No question.
Yeah.
So that's another big one. So, high blood pressure is one. Hormones, same thing. You just don't think of magnesium. Now, will magnesium cure estrogen dominance? No, it won't cure.
Not on its own, it won't.
No, but it plays a big role, and it's like a team effort, right? They all play a role. There's a few nutrients that we love. I mean, you use it successfully in the clinic all the time, to help with estrogen dominance, which is our hormonal support formula, which is built specifically to help with the balance of estrogen, progesterone, and help you metabolize estrogen better. But magnesium is one of those things, absolutely. So hormones is another big one as well. But what's also interesting, obviously, is, everybody knows magnesium because of muscle cramps and spasms, right? A lot of people listening get nighttime cramps. The number one cause of that would be a magnesium deficiency.
Yeah, absolutely.
They start taking magnesium at nighttime, increase their hydration levels, and the cramps generally go away for most people, right? That everybody knows that. But there's a ton of research, and we're going to do a full episode on this in our next one, on the effect that magnesium has on anxiety and depression.
Absolutely.
That is another very well-studied area of magnesium deficiency. And in fact, magnesium, vitamin D, and B12, but we'll talk about that more episode. We don't want to get into that too much.
Yeah, but they're common. They're common deficiencies that we see in the biomarker testing, right? So it's very important, folks. You're listening to this, you get your biomarkers tested. And, if you don't, if you're feeling good, get your biomarkers, because this is very preventative. When we're talking about the importance of this and depression, anxiety, it's incredible the amount that we see today in society, how that's taken off, right? So,
and then one last quick one really quickly before we start talking a little bit about vitamin D and the connection between the two has to do with calcification of the arteries, right? It's interesting. Pretty much half of everybody who has a heart attack, they receive an injection, right, of magnesium chloride, and that helps stop blood clotting and calcification. So they know it at the heart attack level that you probably need an injection of this magnesium chloride. But how neat would it be if people started taking magnesium a long time prior to that before they need it because of, right? Again, the point that we're making is that magnesium is such a common deficiency, and it shows up. Fatigue's a big indicator as well. If you're low in magnesium, it's pretty hard to have good energy. So there are a lot of symptoms of magnesium deficiency, and they overlap a ton with vitamin D, because as the years have gone on with vitamin D, the research on it has just exploded, and we know that essentially every cell in your body has a receptor for vitamin D. Vitamin D can influence and affect every cell and every system of your body.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of, does vitamin D help this or help that? Absolutely does. Every cell in your body can be influenced by vitamin D one way or the other. And it's also one of the most common deficiencies, which is crazy because we have a natural source of it every day. Now, up north, it's hard, right? Because...
Well, why do you think I get holidays? You give me holidays so I can take off to Florida.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because, most of the vitamin D that you get naturally for the sun happens on the arms and, stuff like that. Yeah, arms and legs, which are covered in the wintertime, this time of year. So it's very hard to get that vitamin D this time of year. But a lot of the symptoms for vitamin D and magnesium are kind of intertwined in a lot of ways, right? And a lot of the same issues like leaky gut, a lot of people that have heartburn, a lot of these digestive disorders, they don't get B12, they don't get vitamin D, and they don't get magnesium. So a lot of the symptoms, they kind of...
They overlap.
Yeah, it's like the old-fashioned Play-Doh, right? In a sense, you just take the three different colors. That's the thing with anybody who's had kids knows when they have Play-Doh that the colors don't stay that way forever. And you take three different colors, and that's the three deficiencies, mix them together, and that's what you end up with. It's very, very hard to say, well, generally those three things kind of go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. However, when it comes to vitamin D specifically, because we love vitamin D, we talk about vitamin D all the time, you really should be taking magnesium with vitamin D. And if you have to go high dose of vitamin D for a lot of different reasons why people do that, and we have podcast episodes where we talk about that, then it's even more important that you load up on magnesium as well. And the nice thing about magnesium is you know when you get too much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know when you take too much.
Yeah, and the only side effect, really, right, is
loose bowels.
You get a loose stool. Yeah.
So you kind of when you're getting too much of it.
You can back off of it, but that's the only side effect of it. It's so good for you.
Which is why it's a tremendous natural laxative as well, right? If somebody has an issue with constipation, magnesium is a tremendous natural laxative.
Mm-hmm.
That's the issue. But so the point of this episode really is, if you're taking vitamin D,
which you should,
which absolutely should, then you absolutely should be taking magnesium with it as well. Now, one of the interesting things about magnesium has to do with how much you can actually absorb, right? Because, that's one of the things that we hear a lot as well, because, we use a very specific type of magnesium, and the capsule will say 500 milligrams, but the absorbable is 180, which is very high. It's very good. That's the issue with magnesium. It's very difficult to absorb. If you're taking a 500 milligram capsule or 1,000 milligrams, you're not getting 1,000 milligrams of magnesium.
No.
It depends on the type.
We like the citrate.
Yeah, we use the citrate because of the issues that we see a lot in the clinic. Citrates work really well for that.
Yeah, it really does. And, and that's what I tell people. Yeah, because you hear a lot of stuff on what's the best and what kind of magnesium. And I said, well, look, I'm just going to give you my clinical experience, because I get real patients, real people that have to take magnesium. They have cramping, or they, like you say, depression, or heart issues or whatever, blood pressure. And I give them the magnesium citrate. It's very well, like you say, out of 1,000 milligrams.
Or 500, 180.
Yeah, 180, you're going to get, just in a couple of capsules, you're almost at 400 milligrams of true absorbable, right? Calcium.
And it's highly
magnesium,
absorbed.
It's a tremendous.
So, that's the issue when it comes to magnesium. So, if you're trying to hit a certain number of magnesium, you have to look at the amount you're absorbing. It's different than what the actual capsule volume would be. It's a little different. And, one of the analogies that we use a lot to explain the importance, because, there's citrates, there's fumarates, there's glutamates, there's everything, right?
Yeah.
And, we always use the analogy of a lump of coal. It's interesting because if you look at a lump of coal, one of the components of that is gasoline, right? There's gasoline
in the coal.
However, you can't just take that lump of coal and throw it into the gas tank of your car, even though it contains gasoline. It's the same thing when it comes to supplements. Just because something says magnesium or vitamin E, it doesn't matter. It's the form of which can you use it or not? Is that form, do you absorb it or not? Right? It's like coenzyme Q10 is another. There's so many different examples of this, right?
Yeah.
There is a common type of coenzyme Q10 that is not absorbable, and it's cheaper. Then there's a type that you actually can absorb that's way more expensive. If you're buying a cheap-priced coenzyme Q10,
you're not getting it.
You're not getting it.
Yeah.
Or you're getting very little of it. Yeah. That's why a lot of times when we kind of formulate and build out our supplements, we use the right type, the right form that you can use, which is why we're very picky when we formulate our supplements.
Yeah, we sure are.
Every nutrient has to be a form that your body can actually use.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing how many times in a supplement that's not necessarily the case. So anyways, that's why there's so many different types of magnesiums that are out there, and people have strong opinions. It's like, oh, this one's better than that one. The point is this: you're low in magnesium, take one, but take one that's better. We like citrate. There are other ones for different reasons. That's fine. In our clinic, you're going to get a magnesium citrate. That's what we like. And it's not like we haven't used other ones in the past. It's just that that's the one that we like right now. Again, just a real quick summary. Take vitamin D, take magnesium as well. And that will save a lot of issues when it comes to a lot of symptoms that you may be experiencing. And we love both those nutrients. So we want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. You can also head over to our website, martinclinic.com, and you can sign up for our free newsletters. And there we talk about a lot of these studies, break them down for you. They're nice short emails. They're quick emails, easy to read. And that's kind of what we specialize in when it comes to that. Also, you do a Facebook Live every Thursday.
Yes.
We had a lot of viewers. They jump on, they ask questions, you answer their questions. It's a fantastic way for you to interact. So if you have questions and you're, on a Thursday morning, jump on and go ahead and ask them. I mean,
I have a lot of fun doing that.
Well, I'll tell you, we'll watch them, and I have to admit, there are many times we're chuckling because the technical capabilities that you have, man, there are some times where you're doing it at your house, and I wonder if you can hear me yelling at you.
Turn the camera upside. Turn the camera the right way.
Oh, well, what's funny is we're actually going to put together a little kind of highlight blooper reel of you fooling around upside down. Camera's facing the wrong way.
I thought it was turned off, and I'm yelling at.
Mom's in the shot. You're not in the shot. It's so funny, but they're awesome because it's so real. It's live.
Hey, I'm a dinosaur.
No,
what do you want?
Hey, listen, and you're doing very well with it, but we get a kick out of it, and your grandkids get a real big kick out of it. They just think it's, especially when you're, the phone's backwards or upside down, and you're looking at, anyways. So, but anyways, we get a lot of, tremendous interaction.
We have a
with
lot
people.
of fun with that program.
So again, we want to thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in again next week.